Hello, people. Finished a book, Bunker Hill. This is by this Nathaniel Philbrick guy, and I have read one other of his, In the Heart of the Sea. In the Heart of the Sea was a really good book. This was pretty good. I read it a little bit slower than a couple of the other ones, my recent books. Slowly, I'm going to fill in the blanks for myself on the Revolutionary War. And I'm beginning to think of it as not just the Revolutionary War, but maybe America's first Civil War, even though we weren't America at that time. And at this point in the book, even the rebels are still kind of loyal to the king. They have an idea that George III is actually on their side, and it's just his advisors that are feeding him the wrong information. Towards the end of the book, that sort of changes. I get the feeling, reading about this, that the British really prosecuted this war in kind of a lackluster fashion. I know they were busy elsewhere during this, but it's telling that a lot of the officers that they sent out here, before they left and while they were over here doing their duty, would send letters to the king saying, please relieve me of this duty. They didn't want to go and they didn't want to stay once they got here. I got a little bit of notes here. This was published in 2014, 295 pages. And I'll go right to the third paragraph, page 40. And this is just a personal observation of mine. May 29th, Admiral Montague began setting up the blockade that would prevent all shipping from reaching or leaving Boston Harbor. This is after the Boston Tea Party. The British say, yeah, you don't want to pay us for that tea? We'll stop anything from getting in or out of Boston, and you guys will wither on the vine. It was no easy matter. The Magdalen was placed at Point Shirley at the harbor's extreme northeastern corner, the Mercury 14 miles to the south at Point Allerton, and the Tamar hovered near the harbor entrance. The only reason I marked that paragraph is Nathaniel Philbrick chooses not to tell me how many guns are on these ships. I read a lot of naval history, and that's how you can tell how big these ships are. Were these 74s? Were they 24s? You got to tell me them things. And the first Civil War is my next note. It's because there were so many loyalists in and around Boston, and the rebels, the guys that wanted to go to war against the British troops, they had kind of a mob mentality. The loyalists never, at least at this time, they never really got together and formed their own groups, and they were all living by themselves, and so they were liable to have their house pulled down and be beaten or murdered, tarred and feathered. Definitely a mob mentality. Much like, it's almost like Americans have inherited this way of thinking. Bottom of page 120, top of 121. Oh, this is a two-paragraph thing. But to say that a love of democratic ideals had inspired these country people to take up arms against the regulars is to misrepresent the reality of the revolutionary movement. Freedom was for these militiamen a very relative term. As for their Puritan ancestors, It applied only to those who were just like them. Enslaved African Americans, Indians, women, Catholics, and especially British loyalists were not worthy of the same freedoms they enjoyed. It did not seem a contradiction to these men that standing among them that night was a 34-year-old enslaved African American, Prince Estabrook, owned by town selectman and justice of the peace Benjamin Estabrook. While Gage had honored the civil liberties of the Patriots had refused to respect the rights of those with whom they did not agree, and loyalists had sometimes been brutally suppressed throughout Massachusetts. I'm not going to read the rest of it. The book goes through Lexington and Concord, and there's actually, after that, there's the Battle of the Road. And these were all the same thing on the same day. The British sent some troops in to try and capture these stores of gunpowder. The Continental troops were always short of gunpowder, and the British really underestimated what the hell was going on. They're lucky that any of those men made it back to Boston, and they're even luckier that Gage sent out some troops to reinforce them so that they were on the verge of surrendering. Bunker Hill, I got a question mark there. The Battle of Bunker Hill, according to this book, really wasn't on Bunker Hill. The men sent to fortify this hill went to the wrong hill. It was right next to Bunker Hill, and the battle was just I don't know. The British just charged uphill against prepared lines, and they took 10 times the casualties that the Continentals did. I call them the Continentals because that's what I'm used to calling them. In this book, the author calls them the Provincials. Boston is placed under siege. The fortifications for the siege keep getting tighter and tighter. A guy named Knox goes up to Fort Ticonderoga and brings some cannon down. Again, the cannon help a whole lot, and the cannon kind of make Gage, and by that time it's Howe and Burgoyne and Clinton, make them think they're going to have to evacuate Boston. But again, if they knew how short the Provincials were on gunpowder, it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Third paragraph, 262. I actually have a backlog of books, so today I'm probably going to do another video because I have finished another. By the end of the month, Washington had decided to reverse himself on the issue of African American soldiers and allow free blacks into the Army. Back in Virginia, Royal Government John Murray, Earl of Dunmore, had offered the colony's slaves freedom if they fought on the side of the British. And this may have contributed to Washington's change of heart. Excuse me. But the most compelling reason he decided to put aside the prejudices of his Southern upbringing had to do with what had transpired 6 months before at the Battle of Bunker Hill. There was a black guy that was a free black guy that fought very heroically at the Battle of Bunker Hill. But this thing about the governor of Virginia offering freedom to the black slaves has become very controversial. The Ticonderoga Artillery, I already talked about that, and how evacuates, I already talked about that. They end up pulling out of Boston, and this is just the very beginning of the war. And like I said earlier, I'm going to slowly fill in the gaps. And how I do that is not by buying a book that says the Revolutionary War. I don't want to read about the whole war. I want to read about it bit by bit. That's the best way to do it, because you get an entire book about one tiny subject. You learn everything. You learn most of what there is to know about that subject. I have finished another book, so I'm going to have to do a video later on today. Thank you for watching.